Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. You are in Season 4 of Wrestling at Random, and if you're listening in linear fashion, you are in the waning weeks of Season 4 of Wrestling at Random. And one thing that I know I had been wondering about and had been silently questioning the randomizer about is when are we going to get some New Japan Pro Wrestling in Season 4? There had been nothing so far. Thankfully, the randomizer not only did us a solid with New Japan Pro Wrestling, but this might be the most recent, the most modern show that we've ever reviewed here on this podcast. It has to be right up there, as it's a show from August 1st, 2012, the opening day of New Japan Pro Wrestling's G1 CLIMAX tournament, G1 CLIMAX 22.
Yeah, not only is it the first New Japan we have in the free feed for Season 4, but it's the first time the free feed has tackled a G1 show.
That is true.
We did a G1 show in our Patreon bonus content. So for new listeners, we do a Patreon feed, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, or bonus content in your Apple Podcast subscriptions. Just by hitting the subscribe button unlocks all the bonus episodes. We've done a bonus episode 92 of the bonus content was our first time reviewing a G1. That was the 2009 G1. So just 3 years prior to the show we're about to review now, we watched Togi Makabe run wild in the 2009 G1. We will see him again as we recap the happenings of the 2012 G1 Climax. This, the G1 for me is... It's so much one of my favorite times of the year in pro wrestling. It's one of those times where it's just, in present day, you can fire up New Japan World and you can watch nonstop, relentless, great pro wrestling over and over and over again for days at a time. And it's so much fun to watch the G1, and so much fun to watch guys over the years that have made this their time to challenge themselves, to push them to have the great matches, and Yano matches aside, and those occasional nights off. These tournaments are grueling, and it's hard on the wrestlers, but great for the fans.
Absolutely, and it's also interesting as you go back through whether it's a 2012 G1, a 2009 G1, or many years prior when the tournament first started as a single elimination tournament. It's also interesting to see how the format of the tournament has changed. The blocks, the amount of guys in blocks. In recent years, we've seen 4 blocks instead of 2. We've seen well over 20 guys involved. Different things at different times. So this show also falls at, to me, what is a fascinating time to revisit in New Japan Pro Wrestling history, in that we're firmly entrenched in the rebirth of New Japan, but New Japan World wasn't a thing yet.
No.
Here in 2012. English language commentary for New Japan Pro Wrestling wasn't a thing yet here in 2012. Maybe most notably, the Bullet Club wasn't yet a thing in New Japan in 2012. We're a little less than a year away from the Bullet Club forming, and it's all that makes it a different sort of window to view this through. In that, well, even in modern day, yes, in years after this, we've got the heyday of the mid to late 2010s of the G1, but you always had to worry about a ref bump, and if you're someone like me who hates that stuff and just the ridiculous way that those ref bumps happen and how contrived they are, and how as years go by it gets more and more ridiculous because they try to do new and different ways to knock the referee down, with that somehow not being the end of the match. Here, Bullet Club hasn't been formed, and while you've got heels, you've got faces, we'll see that on this show, you don't have that yet. The other thing that's very notable to me as we watch this show from Korakuen Hall is that it's also an in-between time period for the New Japan fan base. This is a jam-packed Korakuen Hall, which if you're listening in linear fashion, it's wild to see, because as crowds have opened up again in Japan, they aren't selling as many tickets at Korakuen Hall as they were before. Not meaning shows aren't selling out, but a sellout is somewhere around 1,400. Whereas here on this show, you could not pack another human being into this building. It's probably 1,800 strong.
2020 is the number.
Well, yeah, that's a worked number. That goes back to the days when companies would put over 2,000 if they sold out. There's no way there's that many in there, but there's probably legitimately 1,800 people in that building.
For sure.
But when you look at the crowd and you listen to the crowd cheering, it's kind of a halfway point between the old 80s, 90s New Japan crowds, which are largely middle-aged men in white button-up shirts, sometimes wearing ties and suit jackets, sometimes not, and then modern New Japan crowds, which are probably 60% women, a lot younger, look completely different from the old-time New Japan crowds. Here, we've got both. We've got younger people, women screaming for their favorite wrestlers, and then you also have a sizable portion of the crowd that is that kind of businessman look as well. So it's a real kind of crossroads for the company. We also see that in the wrestlers that are on the show and the style of wrestling that's being presented.
Yeah, this show is, for those watching, want to go back and relive this, we're going to review the August 1st, 2012 Korakuen Hall show. This is the 40th anniversary of New Japan here in 2012. And this is the August 1st show. The August 5th show, just a few days later, that would be New Japan's first show on iPay-per-view.
Yes.
The show from Osaka turned out to be a big success as it set what is to be believed as the all-time record for pro wrestling iPay-per-views with 21,615 buys, grossed $494,000 on pay-per-view, which is real money for New Japan at this point in time. And that
completely different revenue stream coming in. They did have something which was pretty wonky called, and this isn't the same service in terms of the independent pro wrestling streaming service we have here in the US, but I believe it was called IWTV. It was something like that, internet wrestling television, and New Japan would stream shows. I believe they weren't live, but they'd go up after the fact. This was terrible video quality, but they had dabbled in these things before. Nothing had really taken hold. And like you said, this G1 doing that iPay-per-view is a big success, and I'm sure that opened the door to the idea moving along of eventually doing New Japan World just a year and a half or so, 2 years later.
Yeah, that $494,000 pay-per-view revenue mark came solely from the Japanese market. This was only available in the Japanese market.
And that's a market that is not big on pay-per-view.
No.
Pay-per-view never generally really broke through in Japan the way it did here. Cable never really broke through the way it did here. So the fact that they were able to kind of crack that nut a little bit with the iPay-per-view is another feather in their cap at a time where they weren't, quite the corporate behemoth that they are right now. They were still they're on the ramp up, but they were still recovering from what had been a disastrous prior decade.
To put it in perspective, I looked up in Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletter, iPay-per-view in 2012, this was not something that was super hot. The WWE record was 9,100 worldwide buys for the prior year's WrestleMania.
Wow.
So to have 21,600 for New Japan, significantly stronger. So the New Japan numbers, they just blew away any show, and it was only announced a few days ahead of time and only in the Japanese market. So really impressive numbers. Let's get into the show. You mentioned the wrestlers on this show. I'm excited to talk about them as we go match by match through this August 1st show. The opening contest, this is a match in the B block. It is Hiroki Goto taking on Rush. Yes. Holy cow, it is a young Rush Mexican star. I was not expected to see him here.
A young Rush who looks physically almost exactly the same as he does now. He's a little bit bigger now, but very similar movement, but looks 12 years old in the face. And he's taking on Hiroki Goto, who always looks the same. Hiroki Goto physically and facially has looked the same for at least 15 years. The only difference here is he has those long billowing pants that have to be an absolute bastard to wrestle in. That's all I can think of watching this match. I hadn't gone back and watched any of Goto from this time period in quite a while. It had to be so difficult to not trip over yourself, while you're running the ropes.
Rush really got to shine here. A great tope with tons of speed and impact, which was even more impactful because of the small ringside area at the Kurikan Hall there. I'm not a Goto guy, so
we've had many a discussion off air about your lack of Hiroki Goto love. For my money, while he may not reach the heights of Hiroshi Tanahashi or Kazuchika Okada, I think that's clear. I don't know that there's been a more consistent wrestler over the past 15 years in that he gives the same level of performance night in and night out, year in and year out, big show, small show. Like, he is a dependable pro wrestler.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to a bar worldwide and order a beer, and if you order a Corona, that Corona is going to taste the same no matter what year it is, no matter what bar you're in around the world. Same thing with Hiroki Goto. If I am getting a Goto match, I know what I'm going to get, and it's consistent and it's fine. Like, it's just not, I'm watching him on offense here, and it just wasn't super engaging for me until he killed Rush with a headbutt.
Yes.
And that popped me.
That was more of what you'd associate in modern times with a Tomohiro Ishii sort of like
yes.
Hammerhead shark type of headbutt from Goto. One thing just you mentioned, you know what you're going to get from him. Also, if he was in a IWGP title match, you knew what you were going to get from him, a loss.
Yes,
and if
every
you are
time.
a longtime fan of the other podcast that I do, the Big Audio Nightmare with Mike Sempervive, you've heard us talk about that in great detail. In modern times, in recent years, Hiroki Goto has finally found his niche as a tag team wrestler with Yoshihashi, and that, in some ways that has probably saved him from falling into the New Japan dads sort of situation, like a Kojima or a Nagata or a Tenzan, where you hit a certain age and then you just don't get to do anything of consequence ever again. He's at least avoided that, but here in 2012, he was far from that fate.
We had more back and forth. Rush hit a headbutt of his own. Tiger driver by Rush. He gets the pin. This had to be considered a huge upset when it happened.
Yeah, I would say so. It was one of those things at the beginning of the tournament to sort of set up Rush as, okay, this guy's a real threat. He beat a guy who in recent years won the G1, a guy who at that point was still perennially in the IWGP title mix, in the mix and winning New Japan Cup tournaments. So, yeah, a big win for Rush. It was interesting, though, in that Rush really did not do a whole lot with New Japan Pro Wrestling after this G1. As cool as it was to see him here, it was not his cup of tea. He did not. He's one of the, you hear a lot about guys signing with, AEW or signing with Ring of Honor before that, and a big part of why they wanted to do so is that they could also work New Japan. That's not something that Rush really has had much interest in.
Second match, we're in the A block. It's Yujiro Takahashi. Yes, that Yujiro. But thank goodness he's taking on Minoru Suzuki.
Yes, and this is, you talk about wrestlers at crossroads or just sort of weird junction points in their careers. Minoru Suzuki is Minoru Suzuki. He was not quite as a pro wrestler, as highly regarded as he is right now. Particularly, you go a few years prior to this, and he and Yoshihiro Takayama were sort of derided, which I always thought to be ridiculous. He was uncooperative, but in a fun way that wrestlers actually liked working with him. But Yujiro, man, he's just off the No Limit tag team with Tetsuya Naito, which is as much of a Sean and Marty situation as you've ever seen in Japanese professional wrestling. The Bullet Club hasn't been formed yet, and it would be several years after their formation that he would join the Bullet Club. So here he's just sort of the Tokyo Pimps, Yujiro Takahashi. He does more in this match than you would see him do now, but it's still so obvious that he's just not at the level of all the other guys that came in around this time. And it always was shocking to me, going back to when he was a young lion. I vividly remember talking with Mike about this because he had a real legit amateur wrestling background. he should have been, from his pedigree, a guy that was a can't miss prospect to be a top level guy, but it never came close to clicking. And yeah, he does a little bit more here, but there's still not much to write home about.
No. What is notable is that people have loved Minoru Suzuki's entrance for so many years.
Yes.
Like, I'm watching it here, and it's like, this is like 11 years ago, and I just watched it last year in person. It's just as popular and over as it is here. I love it. I love when Suzuki comes out here. He's bullying the crowd to clap more for his song, and then he kills a young boy on the way to the ring, and it's everything I love about Minoru Suzuki.
He also has a young, or at least younger, longer-haired, lighter, at this point a junior heavyweight, Taichi.
I did. I got very excited to see Taichi rolling him too.
The early days of Suzuki-gun in New Japan, before they then were exiled, quote unquote, to Noah, and then came back to New Japan. But yes, we have Taichi here with Minoru Suzuki. It's also notable that Suzuki is probably, I would say, a good 25 to 30 pounds heavier here than he is in modern times. And it's not like it's like flab. It's not like he's fat or out of shape, but just his arms, his chest, his legs, everything. He's just bigger. You can even see it in the face. It was still at that point to where he, as a guy who is a smaller heavyweight, really was bulked up to appear like a heavyweight. Whereas now it's always strange when you see him against certain guys, whether it be in New Japan or when he comes over here, and you sort of realize, wow, Minoru Suzuki is basically physically a junior heavyweight, but because of his legitimacy, his credibility, everything about him, his aura, he comes off like a guy who's 6'2", 250, when in essence, he's probably 6 inches and 60 pounds lighter than that.
And it's incredible that a guy has not only maintained that aura, but continues to grow it as he gets north of 50. Like, that's insane to think about, because it usually like okay, you become tough old man, but like here his aura just continues to grow, and it's great to see him here. I'll never not enjoy him laying stiff shots into Yujiro. Could watch that all day. This was fun. Yujiro did get some offense in, but it was all just building to us getting to see Suzuki kill him. Suzuki, he did make great Suzuki faces while putting on a guillotine choke, and Suzuki hits the Gotch pile driver for the victory.
Yeah, definitely a better version of this match than you'd get in modern times, mostly just because at the very least you didn't have the House of Torture garbage that you would have in a modern Yujiro match. But still, the idea of watching Yujiro in any G1 is not something that I get overly excited about. The next match, certainly a unique match, particularly if you thought about it through a modern lens. It's Yuji Nagata against babyface clad in bright blue tights, Machine Gun Carl Anderson, who would go on to make it to the final of this year's G1 against Kazuchika Okada and be at least a 50-50 crowd favorite. He was a guy that the fans loved as a pure babyface here, came through the system, did a bunch of different stuff, had floated around the original LA dojo, but here he's a total babyface.
He became the first foreigner to make it to the final of the tournament since Rick Rude in 1992.
Yes.
I'm watching him wrestle here, and it's been so long. Looking through modern eyes, it's been so long since I've seen serious wrestler Carl Anderson. Like
Carl Anderson that was really pushing, was really trying to prove himself, and wasn't sort of the kind of the meme gimmick sort of wrestler, or at least character, that he and Luke Gallows are now, where it's basically winking and nod, wrestling's fake, we're going to make the towns type of thing. That's not the Carl Anderson character here at all.
No, the slight nitpick, of all your gear to wear, you choose to wear light blue when you're taking on Blue Justice. Could have done something a little different. I
feel like that was message sending. He was trying to show Nagata that he was on his level. It wasn't the same shade of blue. It was a dramatically different shade of blue. So I did wonder what your feelings would be on that, because I know how sensitive you are to that topic, but I thought this was acceptable and maybe even had a reason behind it.
And that's true. That might, if I had Kevin Kelly telling me that, if I had someone helping me with the story, if someone acknowledged that, like, yeah, this is a, hey, like I'm hanging with Blue Justice here, then that's something.
Well, because they were both on the same side of the fence at this point when it comes to heels, baby faces,
Sure,
good guys, bad guys, whatever you want to say. They were sort of both New Japan home team guys at this point.
The people love Yuji Nagata. There's nobody that doesn't love Yuji Nagata at this point in his career. So watching him be extremely popular was fun.
And it's also that time, as I mentioned, where the older New Japan guys, you get shuffled down the card precipitously. Here, he was still at least presented as somewhat of a threat, would get some big wins, wasn't terribly far removed from being an IWGP champion or being in contention in a G1 tournament. So the idea of Carl Anderson going 50-50, going neck and neck with Yuji Nagata meant something.
Great spot where Nagata fakes going with a high kick, goes low instead, and then hits an exploder suplex. They battle on the top rope. Nagata teases falling off, but then he'd sit back up. And he teased it again and sit back up. So and the people were losing their minds for this, and it was awesome. Just great stuff.
These people, this crowd, they were hyped for this show. They were into everybody. They knew everybody's signature spots. They were ready for the opening night of the G1. You mentioned, just some of the stuff Nagata did. Carl Anderson, again, you forget because he's become just kind of just a run-of-the-mill wrestler that paint by numbers exactly what he's going to do, but you forget how good he was in 2012. In so many ways, he reminded me of a young Steve Austin, like a stunning Steve Austin pre-Stone Cold, even though he's got the shaved head and the beard. The other thing about him is just he had a really unique way of moving, which we talk about being something that you don't see enough in modern wrestling and something we both appreciate. He was one of those guys, particularly back in 2012, where you could throw a potato sack on him and a mask, and you'd still know it was Carl Anderson just by the way he hit the ropes or the way he went into doing a senton or something like that.
Back on the top rope this time, Nagata hits the exploder off the top, only gets a 2 count. Nagata misses a high kick. Anderson hits his cutter, the gun stun, and gets the pin. This match exceeded my expectations. I thought it was really fun. We got the handshake and the arm raise of Anderson after the match, but I can't help but think this is probably this would be considered an upset as well, right? This would be like 2 upsets in a row.
Yeah, definitely. Particularly with, it was clear as well as far as the story they're trying to tell going forward into the tournament of Carl Anderson making the final, that this was, this was a big way of doing that. I'm looking at Cage Match right now, and it's not a Cage Match rating for this, but this is only 3.25 stars from Wrestling Observer. And I don't know, I just feel like if you're looking through Modern Nights, if this match happened right now, this feels like this would at least be 3.5, 3.75. This was really, really good. And it was. And also, one of the things about all the matches on this show, in terms of the time for all of these, they all felt right size. That first match was 8:02. Suzuki and Yujiro 8:05. That could have maybe been a little bit shorter, but this was 11.5 minutes, and it was the perfect amount of time. It didn't need to be 20 minutes, but for a just over 10-minute match, like I can't think of anything that was wrong with it.
I have that in my notes here that every match was under 14 minutes.
Yes. The
whole show was over in 2 hours and 25 minutes, which is completely different than what you'd expect from G1, as historically, like I mentioned, the guys hold this for their best singles matches of the year.
Well, certainly there's a different idea. Even we say back then, it's not like it was even 5 years prior. It's like it was 2006, 2007. But there was definitely a different idea in terms of the match booking in New Japan, that not everything had to get close to that time limit, in a G1. And obviously, you'll still see in modern times the undercard matches in a G1 tournament. Even the first couple tournament matches on a given night might not be long. But you're not going to see many G1 nights over the last 5 years or so as we record this where you're going to have a semi-main event or a main event that doesn't go over 20. And most often you're going to have one of those two matches bump up against the time limit.
Block B We mentioned him at the top of the show. The last time we were in a G1, we saw Togi Makabe. Here he is 3 years later taking on Lance Archer in his B-block match. Archer comes out. He's less crazy than the character would become in more recent years.
He's less crazy, but he's trying harder to be crazy. This is the time where he's just off of... He had been in TNA. He was off of his failed run in WWE, in the WWE ECW, where we saw him very briefly on a previous episode as Vance Archer, where he had a short haircut, no beard. Here, he's got the long beard. He's got some like crazy spiked helmet. He's the American Psycho, but he still is kind of... We talk a lot of things on the show being in between. He's still a little bit in between. He still has... the tramp stamp back tattoo. He has not had the graveyard tombstone sort of thing tattooed over it. It's a weird time for Lance Archer.
These two fight into the crowd. Archer's beating him up all over the building. Back inside, all Archer again. Makabe's taking a beating here until he finally hits a lariat and he takes the big man down. Archer, though, cuts him off with a big boot and a leg drop. Makabe catches Archer on the top rope. And here he hits the German suplex, does his sit-up, goes for the King Kong knee drop, but Archer gets the boot up. Archer hits his blackout finisher for the pin. Makabe was a big star here. So are we looking at 3 upsets in a row?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this might have been more of a 50-50, but it's still, I mean, it's another guy who's relatively early on in his New Japan career, establishing himself over a guy who is, as we just talked about, only 3 years removed from winning the G1, not that far removed from being an IWGP champion either, and still definitely in the mix for all of those things. A few notes. Makabe looks exactly the same in 2012 as he would 11 years later. He's one of those guys that...
Timeless, yeah.
When he changed his look and went from Shinya Makabe to Togi Makabe, from that point forward, he physically, facially, everything, the hair looked exactly the same. Lance Archer, the blackout, so much cooler of a move when he sits out with it here than the way he does it in modern times. And I understand, big guy, he's north of 45 years old, probably doesn't want to be taking... bumps on his rear end, you just look at Hulk Hogan to see what taking those type of bumps every match will do to you. It's also funny how watching Lance Archer, when he still comes into New Japan in modern times, he does all the crazy stuff. He yells, he screams, he tries to scare kids, but it's all sort of like winking and nodding. We love Lance Archer. He's been here forever. He's such a cool guy. Whereas here, people are legit terrified. There are women in the front row, I guess probably in their like early to mid 20s, and they are like shrieking and hiding, and they're not laughing. Like there's one woman in the front row where the look on her face is like, I may not make it out of this building alive because there's professional wrestling happening in front of me, and it's scary. It's funny to see that in 2012 because we talk about that so much with the likes of Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody many years prior, but there's a little twinge of that here.
Oh, we'll talk about that again in the Tenzan Okada match. But first, we are back in the A block. Satoshi Kojima taking on Marufuji. I was so excited to see Marufuji in here. So I had a question for you. What's the story with Marufuji being in this G1? Is he still a Noah representative here?
Oh, yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, no, he's a Noah representative. I mean, this was during one of those times during the on again, off again working relationships between New Japan Pro Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Noah. This is a time where you would still see outsiders come in to New Japan Pro Wrestling and do things like the G1 or wrestle at the Tokyo Dome. And you would even see Marufuji, I believe, years later, I think 2016, being in the G1 as well. But the deeper we got into Gato's booking era in New Japan, the less and less we saw of that. And it's only been, as we record this, in modern times, it's only been recently that we've started to see a little bit of that again. But that was one of the hallmarks of Japanese professional wrestling, even here in 2012, with a very much weakened Pro Wrestling Noah, that you got to see guys from different promotions come over and do different things like this. Marufuji was probably the guy from Pro Wrestling Noah that was the most New Japan friendly in terms of making New Japan appearances, and a guy that while he was from a different company that the New Japan fans really embraced. Like, it wasn't often that it was it's this dirty outsider, let's boom. It was Marufuji's here. He's awesome. We love him. We're excited he's here on our show.
Yeah, and you see it right away in the open here where Marufuji does some flippity-doos and a drop kick to get his arm free from an arm wringer, and this crowd is pumped. You can already tell they're glad he's here.
Yeah, and this is still prime or close to prime Marufuji. This is him having fully made the transition years prior from junior heavyweight to heavyweight, but he hasn't been slowed down that much by the injuries, particularly the knee injuries that would slow him down quite a bit. Kojima, it's funny seeing him here in that you think, like in your head, you think, wow, Kojima now in modern times looks exactly the same. He's looked the same for 15 years. And then you actually go back and watch this from 11 years ago, and he looks so much younger facially. He's smaller. It's funny in that ever since whatever it's been, 4 or 5 years since he blew out his knee, when he came back, like his upper body got so much bigger, but I don't know if he just wasn't doing leg day as much, if Bread Club didn't really focus on the legs, but like now there's a big difference. He still is it's ridiculous for being,
absolutely
above 50 years old. You talked about it with Suzuki. He's another one, but here he definitely looks a lot younger, and he is moving in this match. Like you would think Marufuji, Kojima, Marufuji's going to be running circles around him. Kojima, he had ring speed back then.
Kojima hit an awesome Hangman's neck breaker here. This was super cool. He's working on the neck of Marufuji. Kojima with tons of chops in the corner, and people are into this. Like this crowd is hot. They've been hot all night.
They're into all of Kojima's signature stuff. The chops, they're haying along to the chops. When he throws Marufuji into the corner and gets ready to do the top rope elbow and does his yell to the crowd, they all in unison scream it back. They know, everybody here knows who all the characters are. They don't need anything explained to them.
They were fighting outside the ring, and as Kojima goes to get back into the ring, Marufuji sprints to the top rope, hits a big kick off the top. Marufuji hits a sliced bread for a 2 count. Marufuji's on the apron. He gets killed with a lariat by Kojima, turning him completely inside out. He crashes to the mats outside.
A lariat to the face. There's a reason that they call Satoshi Kojima's lariats the Western lariat. It's because it's a Stan Hansen style lariat, and that's exactly what this looks like. This looks like a wild, crazy Stan Hansen killing some dude in the mid-'80s.
Kojima goes outside to get him, throws him back in the ring, hits a brainbuster, gets a long 2 count. Marufuji kicks out. Kojima eats a kick, and Marufuji hits a Rana where he hooks the legs on that Rana, holds him in, gets the pin. So Marufuji with the win. I
loved this match. You talked about it with the Nagata Carl Anderson match. I thought this match even more so. Like if you're looking for an approximately 10-minute match with 2 great wrestlers who just do everything right and have a perfect match for what they set out to do, like this is it. I love the finish with Marufuji hitting that sort of Frankensteiner out of nowhere, grabbing the pin hold. It was kind of splitting the difference between a Scott Steiner Frankensteiner and a Rey Mysterio Rana. And you could even argue, even though Marufuji had held everything he could hold in Pro Wrestling Noah, you could even argue this is a little bit of an upset as well, considering where Kojima was in his New Japan run, what he had done, IWGP titles, G1's the whole deal. Marufuji coming in and beating Kojima on night 1, again, sort of kind of staking the claim so all the fans know, okay, Marufuji is a legit player in this tournament. It's not just an outsider special attraction. He's going to be a factor.
I was going to say, it's exactly what you mentioned they did with Rush in the opener here. So establishing these guys as it's not just a gimme that they're not going to win. So we go to another Block B match. Hiroshi Tenzan taking on Kazuchika Okada. And this is Okada's first ever G1 tournament here.
Yes. And I believe only the second time we've had an Okada match on this podcast. I believe in the bonus feed, we had that Okada Young Lion match. I believe it was on that 2009 G1 show. I can't remember who it was that he wrestled in the opener. But we talked about how it was so obvious right away as a young lion that this guy was going to
Was
be
it Tajiri? Did he wrestle Tajiri?
He did wrestle Tajiri. What a weird time capsule of a match that was. Here, he's, about 8 months into his run as the Rainmaker with Gedo as his manager in New Japan. He had just a couple months prior lost the IWGP title back to Hiroshi Tanahashi, who he had beaten earlier that same year in February. And so the question going into this tournament from a storyline standpoint is, how is Kazuchika Okada going to respond? Will this G1 show that he was just a flash in the pan? Was that, that win of the title and the couple of defenses that he had, was that just a fluke? Or is he going to go on a real run here in this tournament and as a main eventer for the company going forward?
The people were way behind Tenzan in this match early on.
Including which they would always do in Tenzan matches back then, because that's the sound he would make when he would do his Mongolian chop. So the whole crowd would do that. It's funny. I don't know if funny is the right word, but like Tenzan, he's so much less broken down in 2012 than he is in modern times, but he still in 2012 is so much more broken down than he was in 2004 when he won the G1 and he was really, in some ways, the top heavyweight in the company. Even here in 2012, like, his left arm is just stuck straight as he's running. There's not a whole lot of range of motion in it. You can see his neck is really small from the horrendous neck injuries that he's had, but he's considered more of a threat then than he would be now. Although I still think from the crowd reactions here, you can tell the crowd expects Okada to win.
They're fighting outside the ring, and Okada is pulling at the face of Tenzan, and they're like in the laps of the front row people, and these people are looking away in terror. They cannot handle the violence that Okada is.
Their hands are over their faces, and then they're turning, to your point, as far away as they could, because I mean, to be fair to them, people are packed in to Corcoran Hall like sardines. Like, it is ridiculous. If you had to get up and move, you couldn't. Your only chance was if you're on an aisle. And even if you're on an aisle, the amount of space between the seat on the aisle and then the aisle seat on the section next to you is about as much as you would expect to have normally, just if it was seats next to each other. Like, there's not much room.
It looked awesome. Anytime you get good crowd reactions like that, it was shot perfectly by the camera crew. So it was just great production as well.
Well, that's something we always should mention, because we don't do a lot of New Japan here on this. Randomizer hasn't brought us much. The absolute gold standard when it comes to television production for wrestling, whether it be camera shot quality, choice of camera shots, the fact that the whole idea behind producing wrestling for television in New Japan is that the camera will find the action instead of the action finding the camera, which allows you to slip into it so much more. You're not waiting for somebody to turn toward the hard camera to hit their finisher. It's the camera work finding them.
Back in the ring, we head towards the finish. A top rope elbow by Okada. They're countering their finishes. Tenzan hits a diving headbutt off the top, gets a 2 count. And then a long anaconda vice by Tenzan. Okada tries to fight out, but gets slammed back down again. Headed on for a long time.
That was always one of Tenzan's, once he developed the anaconda vice, in the years where he was contending for championships, or particularly when he was winning the G1 year after year, that spot, him having the anaconda vice on, his opponent dramatically getting to his feet while still being in the hold, and then Tenzan doing that anaconda slam or anaconda buster and bringing him back down and still holding on to it and then getting the submission. That was always a big finish. So that was, part of, I think, why the crowd reacted the way they did here to Okada not falling to it.
He struggled and finally got his foot to the bottom rope for the break. Okada then, in a panic, has to get moving, and he does by hitting his perfect drop kick, hits the Rainmaker, gets the pin.
Really fun match. I definitely wouldn't say it was, for my money, at the level of the Tenzan, or excuse me, the Kojima Marufuji match, but it's always so striking to me how, yes, Okada has definitely improved since then, but he still is pretty much Okada, best wrestler in the world or near it here in 2012. And I just always go back to his return like 8 months prior, how bad and scared and not impressive he looked at Wrestle Kingdom against Yoshihashi when they both returned from their respective excursions, when he made that challenge to Tanahashi to end that Wrestle Kingdom, people literally, you could hear the crowd laughing. People didn't buy into it. And then he shows up a month later, has an incredible performance with Tanahashi, has several other great title matches, and then follows it up here with a great match to start with Tenzan. Really the only difference is he's skinnier here. Otherwise, he's the Okada that you know and love.
And he's always going to have the best last 5 minutes of a match you're ever going to see. It never fails. Set your watch to it.
He is. I think there will be arguments for a long time about, who's the best wrestler ever or who's the best wrestler of the modern era. He belongs in that conversation. But to your point, he is undisputed the best finishing sequence guy that I've ever seen in 35 plus years of watching pro wrestling.
Block B, Tetsuya Naito taking on Shinsuke Nakamura. We've had this match a few times on this podcast, and I always have time for another Naito Nakamura match. Nakamura's got a taped up shoulder. They're trading holds early. Nakamura gets the heat, and I forgot how cool heel Nakamura is. His cocky, arrogant tactics. This was so much fun to watch.
Yeah, heel or at least sort of heel edge, depending on the opponent. Nakamura, just to place them both because they, throughout their careers went through a lot of changes during this particular time. Nakamura is fully the Shinsuke Nakamura, the Freddie Mercury meets Michael Jackson meets Shinsuke Nakamura character that he had developed. Because we've talked about before, we had a match with him and Naito. I think it was on the bonus feed where he had come back from Mexico and he had the look, but he didn't really have the mannerisms yet. Here, he is 100% the Shinsuke Nakamura that
Full
everyone
package.
would know. And this is the guy that WWE signed because they wanted, in theory at least, this version of him. Tetsuya Naito is still Stardust genius Tetsuya Naito. He is not LIJ Naito. There's a bit of revisionist history with him where people say that this version of Naito was never over. Categorically false. He is
super popular.
Super over in this match as a babyface, accepted by the fans. The whole problem was he got hurt after. So this match, this tournament happens. Naito blows out his knee. He's gone for a long time. He comes back and immediately wins the 2013 G1. And at that point in Japan, usually if guys got hurt, they'd come back and it would be a slow build for them back to the level they were at before or getting to an even higher level than they've been at before. That's what fans were conditioned to. Naito came back, looked good, but didn't look quite as good as before the injury. And the fans just didn't buy it. They did not accept him coming back and winning the G1. And that set the whole LIJ transformation into motion. But here, we'll see it throughout the match. As much as people love Nakamura, they love Naito too.
Big time. Naito is a big time babyface here, and he is moving. You want to talk about a guy that we're used to seeing. You've seen him in modern times. Dealing with so many injuries that you forget when you see this era Naito how fast he was and how much he could move.
How fast he was, how much he can move, how unique and specific movements he had. The younger version of Naito from his young Lion days all the way through to here in 2012 in the G1, you really see how much he was influenced by Keiji Muto.
Sure.
There's so many things. Just the out of nowhere bursts of speed, the way he would spring up to the top rope. He is a Muto disciple, and you see that here.
Yeah, you see him leaping to the top rope, hitting a shotgun drop kick off the top. Shinsuke cut him off. Starts throwing knees to the downed Naito on the mat.
Those MMA-style nasty knees that so many guys try to throw, and they look terrible. Shinsuke was the master of doing those. It would look like people would get killed from them, but it didn't. They weren't even connecting, but you couldn't tell.
He charges in for his Bumbaye knee, but Naito hits a rolling kick and a Uranagi.
This rolling kick was awesome. This is a straight-up Jushin Liger capo kick counter with, as you said, Nakamura running in for the knee, and then he hits that beautiful Hase-style Uranagi, which is one of those things that I haven't gone back and watched old Naito in a long time, or I guess young Naito. I totally forgot that he did that move. It was one of the best non-Hase style Uranagis that I've seen. It was really, really good.
Naito's laying in some open hand slaps, hits a flying forearm. He goes to the top rope again, but gets cut off. Nakamura with a belly-to-back suplex off the top, flipping Naito completely around.
It was the reverse power slam, which was always his setup for the Bamiye knee. Here it was a top rope reverse power slam.
We get counters, reversals, roll-ups for near falls. Exciting stuff here. Naito back to the top. He hits the Stardust Press for the pin. The match started slow, picked up to a great pace, and it was a total sprint to the finish. A lot of fun.
Yeah, I love this. Like you said, it had the first, 8, 9, 10 minutes of a match that was going to go 25.
Yep.
And then they hit a certain point, like 10 minutes in, and then boom, they just went into a crazy finishing stretch that you described with all the counters. I would say, I think now of the two or three, I think it's been 3 Nakamura Naito matches that we've watched. I think this might have been my favorite, even though it was the shortest. I think mostly because this was the fully formed Shinsuke Nakamura character that we'd been waiting to see in some of those other matches. And then just that just, all right, we're going to the finish. And then they hit that sequence was awesome. It was funny. There was one moment in this match where you can see that Tetsuya Naito has the LIJ version of him waiting to get out as he finally gets the advantage on Nakamura, and he puts his foot on Nakamura's face, and he does the good vibes, shaking his head and making the weird noises thing. I'm like, yeah, that's the Naito we all know now.
And we go to our main event. The A block. Your IWGP heavyweight champion, Hiroshi Tanahashi, taking on Shelton Benjamin. We're in the Shelton Benjamin era of New Japan.
Yes, very early on in it. This is Shelton Benjamin's first singles match in New Japan Pro Wrestling. He was on the Tokyo Dome show. He was on Wrestle Kingdom 6, teaming with MVP against Masato Tanaka and Yujiro Takahashi. He had a few other matches teaming with MVP, but this would be his first singles match. So, while there have been a few matches, this is really introducing Shelton Benjamin in full to the New Japan Pro Wrestling fan base, and he's going against the 2012 version of Hiroshi Tanahashi, who's just won the IWGP title back. And while he had lost it a few months prior to Okada, Tanahashi is still the guy in New Japan at this point. The ace is not just a nickname, it is a fact. The knee injuries that would really take its toll on him have not done too much damage yet. Maybe he's not quite as quick as he would have been in 2008, 2009, but he still is a completely different wrestler athletically than he would be in modern days. We've talked about it before. He might be the best example ever. I guess Muto is another one like that, but Tanahashi might be the best example in modern pro wrestling history at adapting to time completely ravaging his body and going from an athletic marvel of a wrestler to a guy that was the best wrestler in the world almost solely with his mind and the stuff he could put together in matches.
His incredible mind for wrestling, and also his just the way that he connects with the people. It's so rare. It's such a rare thing to see. I mean, like, he's got the popularity of peak John Cena, right? Like, that's where he's at, like, when you're looking at the similar time period here.
But without the people that hate him.
But exactly. But unanimous verdict that we all love this man. And he's a guy who knows how to harness his popularity along with his abilities and his mind to be just a legend. Like, this guy is a legend. You want to talk about greatest wrestlers of all time. He's got to be in the conversation every single time.
For my money, and again, it's hard to speak beyond the eras that I lived in or the eras that, I've been able to watch, through this podcast and well before this podcast. But for my money, when you factor everything in, he's the best wrestler I've ever seen in my lifetime. You factor in the connection with the crowd, the athleticism of his early stage of his career and being that type of wrestler, and then adapting so great to, even in modern times when his legs are beyond shot, he still can have great matches when time calls for it. And to me, he's, as a wrestler, bell to bell, he's the combination of all the other great wrestlers from his era or before. He's Shawn Michaels. He's Bret Hart. He's Ric Flair. He's Sting. He's John Cena. He's all those guys in one. And to me, like, you talked about just how great of a babyface he is. And that's true. Like, he comes out and he's mobbed like it's Kerry Von Erich in 1983 at the Sportatorium. He literally can't get through the sea of people as he's trying to get to the ring. But then, like Bret Hart, if and when the match calls for it, in match, he can shift to being the best heel you've ever seen. But then by the end of the match, the crowd all loves him again. He's maybe the most unique wrestler of the past 35 years for my money.
Shelton Benjamin showing off his amateur wrestling. You're going to introduce Shelton as a single? Here you go. Show what he does well, and that's how they open up this match. He's riding Tanahashi to start the match.
This opening of this match is just genius stuff because Shelton Benjamin, again, only 3 matches in New Japan at this point, none of them singles. Here, Korakuen Hall, the hardest of the hardcore fans, he's against the best wrestler in the world. So what do? Like you said, the first sequence is Shelton Benjamin getting the advantage with amateur wrestling. Everything that Tanahashi tries to do, every time he scoots out, Benjamin will shift his hips and continue on and keep riding. And the crowd gets more and more like, oh, like they can't believe what they're seeing. So then that happens. There's a rope break. They reset. What's the next sequence? Tanahashi grabs a wrist lock. Shelton Benjamin jumps up all in one motion to the top rope, springs back off like split-legged moonsault style, but lands on his feet and rolls through for an arm drag. Gets a great response. And so what have we done in the first 90 seconds of this match? We've established the 2 defining characteristics of Shelton Benjamin as a pro wrestler. Incredible amateur background, incredible athlete. If you knew nothing about him, you immediately knew what he was about, and you knew that he was a threat to Tanahashi. It was just genius stuff as far as starting a match.
Yeah, and you can hear from the crowd reaction that story was told, story was comprehended, message received.
Yes,
so,
and it makes everything that happens as the match goes on mean so much more because now the fans understand who this guy is and how and why he's a threat to Tanahashi.
Tanahashi goes to work. He has Benjamin down. He goes to the middle rope, then decides he's going to go to the top rope, but he took too much time making this decision. Benjamin pops up, runs up the corner, throws Tanahashi off, and he fires Tanahashi into the corner. And I love how Tanahashi sells the back and the whiplash of hitting the buckles. Like we always talk about, Bret Hart and those folks. But we're having a Mount Rushmore of guys hitting the buckles. Don't sleep on Tanahashi.
No, this was the back first version of a Bret Hart sternum first into the buckles. Again, gets an incredible reaction from the crowd for just an Irish whip into the corner. That whole spot that you mentioned with Tanahashi, he's on the second rope going for what he always hits, his second rope somersault senton. Instead, because he's in there with Shelton Benjamin, who just showed his crazy athleticism, Tanahashi's like, no, I'm Hiroshi Tanahashi. I have an ego. I can go to the top rope and do something even more spectacular. But to your point, he gets caught and Benjamin hits him with that all-in-one motion, springing to the top, coming back off with the belly-to-belly suplex. Again, just perfect way to start this match.
Benjamin hits a super kick, gets a 2 count. He counters Tanahashi's suplex attempts. He rolls through into an ankle lock submission. So we're also showing, we're reminding everyone that, he was also part of Team Angle. And
the announcers are saying that. This is Japanese announcers, but you hear the second he rolls through into that ankle lock, you hear the announcers yelling, Kurt Angle, WWE, Team Angle. So they're making sure the fans know that as well.
Tanahashi's able to escape. He reverses and puts on a Texas Cloverleaf. After a rope break, they're trading forearms. Tanahashi goes to the top again. Benjamin again runs up the turnbuckles, but this time Tanahashi knocks him off. He goes for the frog splash, but But Benjamin gets the knees up and does one of my favorite things. You get the knees up and you immediately transition right into a cradle for a pin attempt. This was a great near fall.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is one of those things that I would love to see guys do more often. That second the knees connect on the counter, it's not even like you're letting the guy roll through. It's all in one motion. You're grabbing that cradle, and you got a great near fall out of it.
Benjamin hits his move where a guy catches his leg on a kick attempt, and then he spins around and hits the guy doing like a leg whip.
Yes,
always gets a pop from the crowd every time he does it.
For sure. And I feel like whenever he, like the first few times he's in a new territory, whether it was here or when he went to ROH or Noah or back in WWE, that always people are like, oh my God, what is that?
Sling blade by Tanahashi gets a 2 count. Tanahashi misses a charge into the corner. Benjamin misses a stinger splash into the corner. Tanahashi gets dumped over the top, but he skins the cat back in. Tosses Benjamin, who does the same thing, skins the cat back in.
So great. Because both guys would do this all the time, and the fact that it just came off so well. This match, I keep saying it, this is such a smart and fun professional wrestling match.
They both high kick each other at the same time, and both men are down. We get another sling blade, and Tanahashi leaps to the top again, hits the frog splash this time, gets the pin. Fun match. Tanahashi's a legend. The man plays air guitar after the match and celebrates with the people.
We get encores. He's doing the air guitar as he would do. That was always the way he'd close out shows. He gets ready to leave, and we hear the crowd chanting, "Encore, encore!" And so he goes back in. He plays more air guitar as the guitar sounds play over the PA system. The perfect superstar, the perfect ace, the perfect top guy for a wrestling promotion in 2012. And it was not easy sledding. He had to gain acceptance. He was not an Inoki style guy whatsoever. And he eventually became the symbol, not only of like bringing New Japan back to prominence, but of pairing New Japan out of the era they were in into a completely different type of thing. While yes, his wrestling style is in some ways reminiscent of Tetsuya Fujinami or Keiji Muto, his style, his character was something you never had as a top guy in New Japan before.
No, and what a place to think that, yeah, he's the guy bridging it from the dark days of where Inoki left it, bridging it to relevance and off the brink, to then worldwide expansion. He's been there for all of that. That's incredible.
And continues to be. And the other thing is that the unselfishness, he in here at 2012 is at the absolute height of his powers, as I assume you'll understand from the way we've explained and talked about this match. He's at the height of his powers. And at that time, he put over a guy that a month earlier, when this happened in February 2012 and Okada beat Tanahashi to win the title, there were a lot of questions about Okada. Tanahashi put him over as strong as he possibly could when he was at his strongest point, and made the guy that then helped carry the next decade plus forward of New Japan Pro Wrestling, which just again speaks to all the ways that you can say that Hiroshi Tanahashi is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time.
The next night, there was a match between Naito and Okada, and they had a 4.5-star match, according to the Observer. So, again, we just missed a great show from the randomizer, but still got a good one here.
That does not surprise me, because the match they had in March of this year at Cork and Hall was the anniversary show for New Japan Pro Wrestling, the 40th anniversary show, which, again, tells you about the difference in size of the company, that they're doing their anniversary show at Cork and Hall with an IWGP title match, but it was Okada and Naito. And in a lot of ways, that was the match that started to usher in the new era of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And after Okada beat Tanahashi, that was a match where it was like, okay, Okada's for real, Naito's for real, let's go.
Okada, like we mentioned, beat Carl Anderson to become the youngest ever to win the G1 at 24 years old. Masa Chono was 27 as the previous record holder.
It's insane to think Okada was only 24 years old here, because he still is like 35 years old as we record this, and you don't feel like he's anywhere near at the end of his road as a top guy. The fact that they got a guy and developed a guy at that young of an age, and got him to that level at 24 years old, which does not happen in New Japan that often, as you just pointed out, and then have been able to ride that for so long. It's incredible.
Yeah, he won the G1 tournament in his first attempt.
Yeah.
So, which is also something special for here. So, let's look back at this show. Adam, your favorite thing on this show? We got a lot to choose from, a lot of good stuff here.
It's hard. I mean, I up until the main event, I would have probably said either the entirety of the Marufuji Kojima match or the finishing stretch of Naito and Nakamura. And maybe Naito and Nakamura was a little bit better of a match. I don't know, but like Tanahashi and Benjamin, it was just so fun and it was so smart. We laid out all of the reasons why. They did a perfect job. Like if you're a booker or you're an agent, you're a matchmaker, or whatever you want to say, and you're introducing a new wrestler to your audience and you want to get every single thing about that wrestler over while also not having them win, but having them have a great showing, this was the picture perfect way to do it. Textbook stuff. So yeah, I think that probably is my favorite. Just how they handle Benjamin and seeing peak Tanahashi do his thing.
Agreed. I loved the way that Naito Nakamura was paced, especially with my 2023 brain saying, oh, they're going 20. And then watching this sprint to the finish was super fun. The Marufuji Kojima match was great. Honorable mention to, of course, Yuji Nagata and his match earlier with Carl Anderson. So top to bottom, great show. But I think we all have to say that Tanahashi Benjamin was fantastic as well. So a lot to choose from on the positive side. On the negative side, what was your least favorite thing about this show?
There's honestly not much. It's always annoying, and I understand why, but it's annoying when entrances are cut on New Japan World. Thankfully, the closer we get to modern times, the more themes they have rights to. So the more entrances we get. As far as in-ring action, and he was nowhere near as bad as he is right now, but having to watch a Yujiro match among the rest of this greatness is not necessarily something I'm thrilled about.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, Yujiro, too much offense on Suzuki. Didn't enjoy that. I could have, we talked about no match being over 14 minutes. I think, we could have gone longer on a couple of these matches. I could have had a few more minutes on, especially the last two with Nakamura Naito and Tanahashi Benjamin. So I think they could have. Some of the match lengths could have been a little bit longer, and it could have been a 3-hour show instead of 2 hours 25. You could have gone to 2:45 and threw 20 minutes onto this.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what we talked about at the start of the show, how this is such an interesting transition time for New Japan, where at first blush, it visually and with a lot of the wrestlers on the show doesn't look that different from what you'd see 11 years later. But the booking philosophy, the matchmaking philosophy, the timing and pacing of the matches, completely different.
And we want to hear from you and your feedback on all things New Japan, this podcast, other shows we've watched. Again, this is all evergreen content. So anytime you want to chime in, if you just listened to an episode from season 3 and you've got some comments, bring them on. We know this is evergreen content. We want to hear from you. The best ways to interact with the show is via Twitter and Instagram at WrestleAtRandom. You can also interact with us via YouTube comments. We've got a YouTube channel for the video version of this podcast as well. You can watch Adam and I discuss this over at Wrestling at Random Podcast. If you search for that channel on YouTube, you subscribe there, leave comments as well. We love to interact with folks there. And you can also support the show by going to patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, like I mentioned at the top of the show. That's where we put out a bonus episode every single week of this podcast, well over 100. So just by subscribing for 1 month, you unlock the entire back catalog of evergreen new content for you. And we put out new podcasts every single week. You mentioned we were hitting the season break soon. We're still putting out new episodes every single week over in the bonus content. So go check that out. If you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, you don't have to go anywhere. You can just hit the subscribe button right there in the podcatcher you're listening to on Apple Podcasts, and it'll unlock everything that's marked bonus in your feed right now just by pushing that one button. So many ways to subscribe, many ways to support the show. If you can't do it financially in these times, totally understand that as well. You can help us out by subscribing via your podcatcher of choice, subscribing via YouTube, and telling your wrestling fan friends about the show. Your word of mouth continues to spread the word about this podcast, and we continue to get new listeners every single week, and we owe it all to the word of mouth and support of everyone who enjoys this show. So thank you to everyone who listens. Thank you to all of our patrons for keeping the lights on. And with that, we're calling it a podcast. Thank you too, Adam.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and thank you, Randomizer. I get really excited when I get to scratch a little bit of my big audio nightmare itch here on Wrestling at Random, and the Randomizer allowed that. So, yeah, we'll see what comes next. Like you said, we're getting down to the end of Season 4, but also, as you said, seasons never end in the bonus feed. There are no seasons. It's like, I don't know, it's like San Francisco or something. It's just always 70 degrees and nice and sunny over there. No ebbs and flows.
Birthday cake every day. Go enjoy it. Yeah, puppy dogs, rainbows, and ice cream. Go have
pizza, birthday cake, and gummy worms with a side of donuts. That's what I like, and that's what the bonus feed is.
And with that, we're wrapping it up. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.